Good morning, Genesis class. It's good to be back with you again. It's Saturday morning on August the 22nd. I'm in a different spot today. That's hard for me to do. I'm not good with change, but I have now moved into my home office here, which is really our downstairs guest bedroom. And today we are continuing our series on why do I need the church. The title of today's lesson is We Strengthen One Another, and we're back in the book of Ephesians where we've been for this whole lesson. I think we have one more next week in Ephesians. I'll be talking from mainly from chapter 5 today, so if you want to turn to that and get ready, please do. Well, with a title like We Strengthen One Another, I thought I would kind of start out by posing the question, don't we all need people in our lives that we can draw strength from, and certainly in the time of a pandemic. I can tell you that during this pandemic, as Kim and I have tried hard to protect one another from getting COVID-19, we've also tried to provide each other strength from not putting on the COVID-20. Can't really see, but pointing to the belly here. Maybe in my case, more protection against the COVID 5 or 10, and in Kim's case, God bless her, maybe more like 1 or 2. Don't know how she does that, but she does. But we've been trying to be good. We take our morning walks. We're starting to get a bit of a reputation in the neighborhood. There they go again, like the Energizer bunnies in the morning. We also try to have our morning workouts. We got our daily workouts. We've got a little exercise room upstairs. Kim usually has a workout in the afternoon, and I'm usually more of an evening person because of the workday. But we also monitor each other's pantry behavior. That's really more of a task for Kim to monitor mine than the reverse. But I got the pantries right outside that door, so that's a real temptation for me, especially on a boring conference call when I can just keep the phone going in here and just kind of roam the downstairs. So yeah, Kim has to watch out for me. I think her favorite phrase the last few months has been do you really need that? And one of my favorite responses has been no. Now that doesn't really stop me from getting a handful of peanuts or a couple of potato chips, but it's become a fun repartee. We also try to strengthen each other in other aspects of our physical lives as we're growing older. I've never been really good about drinking water, and Kim got on me about that, some time ago. In fact, got my water here with me now. So trying to be a lot better about hydrating, which is also not easy because water doesn't do a whole lot for me, but it's supposed to be good for you. Obviously, getting enough sleep. We try to make sure each other, gets enough sleep and as restful as it can. And we try to listen to our bodies too, particularly when it comes to, working out. I've got some free weights upstairs, and back in the 30s, hey, you feel a little twinge in the back. Who cares? Just I'm powering through that, right? Because at most it's going to hurt, a few hours, and then it's over. Getting to the 40s, and it's like, that. It's day 4, and that still hurts, but okay, no big deal. Getting to the 50s, and I just went through it. You twinged the back, and it hurt for 6 weeks. So we're helping each other with that one too. And my wife will just flat out tell me, you're done. You said you felt a twinge. The weights are going in the closet, and you're not touching them for weeks. And I'll just say yes, ma'am, and move on that one because if you've ever hurt your back, having it hurt for 6 weeks is no fun. But we're trying to do our best to strengthen each other in our physical lives. But it got me to thinking, as much as we need people around us to strengthen our physical lives, don't we need people around us to help give us strength in our spiritual lives, and even more so. And who does that? Who does that? Well, you can't see it, but I have Bible right here in front of me, and obviously we get strength from the Bible. But the church, the church is a source of strength in our spiritual lives, and that's something we should try to draw on. So that's kind of the theme for the day is how, why do we need the church? Well, we need the church and those in the church as a source of strength. To kind of step back a little bit, if you've watched this series of lessons, I did lesson 1, and we talked some about how the book of Ephesians, spent a little bit more time in that lesson talking about the book of Ephesians. We talked about the redwoods too, and I won't talk about the redwoods anymore. I know Alice Moore probably wants me to spend a few more minutes on the redwoods, but we've put that one in the past. But the focal points in the book of Ephesians, number one was that God, the power of God is over all other spiritual authorities. These were important messages, I should say, for a first century Gentile audience, mainly Gentile audience that were new converts and surrounded by this pagan culture. So God had power over any of these pagan idols that the readers were associated with. Also, Christ was the head of the church, and the church was unified under Christ. Those were really the focal points of chapters 1 and 2 from the first lesson. But we're really talking now more about the proper conduct of the church. And Jeff kind of started that. He did start that in chapter 4. I'll mention that here in a minute, but Jeff went through it in details very ably, of course, last week. So chapters 1 through 3 of Ephesians really mainly deal with those first 3 themes. Chapters 4 through 6 start to talk more about the proper conduct of the church. So, and I should mention that when Paul was doing that, he was providing strength. He was giving guidance on how to live a Christian life and providing strength to his brothers and sisters in Asia Minor, in Ephesus and in the regions around Ephesus. So having said that, I do want to look back just a little bit at chapter 4. Like I said, Jeff covered this great last week. As Paul gets into kind of these themes about the proper conduct of the church, he kind of vacillates between talking about things you shouldn't do and then the things that you should do. So in chapter 4, verse 25, he starts to go through what I call part 1 of the don'ts. He talks about how we should not speak falsely towards one another. He talked about how we should never let anger fester, because a festering anger leads towards temptation to sinful behavior against one another. And he mentioned this thought about how the thief should now do honest work, which really means that the thief should not only no longer steal, but the thief should now do honest work. So he's telling his readers, this is not just about stopping inappropriate behaviors, it's about starting appropriate behaviors. So, we should speak well of one another instead of speaking falsely against one another. We should seek to make peace with one another instead of letting anger fester. So with that background, we'll move into chapter 5. You don't have verses 1 and 2 in your quarterly, but I'm going to read that from my ESV. So verses 1 and 2, chapter 5. Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. So starts out with therefore, which we see all the time. So this is a transition. He's talked about don't. Now he's transitioning into a section of what he does want us to do. He wants us to be imitators of God, but in what way? He wants us to be imitators in God as a child might emulate a parent. Well, the Bible doesn't talk about God in detail, so who is our godly model? Our godly model, of course, is Christ. So we are supposed to imitate God by walking in love as Christ walked in love. And what sort of love was that? It was a sacrificial love, a powerful love. So that's how we are to imitate God. So instead of doing all these bad things, this is what Paul is instructing his readers to do. So we get into verses 3 through 7, which I won't cover, but it's I would call it the don'ts part 2. And again, remembering who Paul's audience was here, these newly converted, predominantly Gentiles living in a Roman pagan culture. He tells them, don't be sexually immoral or impure, don't be covetous, and he likens that to idolatry. And then he says, don't engage in crude or foolish talk. And then he says, and not only should you not be doing that yourselves, but don't engage or partner with anyone else who's doing that, with a particular emphasis on those who claim to be followers of the way, but are not acting like it. In fact, Paul uses some pretty harsh language for those folks in this section where he says the wrath of God will come upon them. So once we get through verses 3 through 7, which again is a kind of another series of the don'ts, he comes back around to verse 8. This is in your quarterly, so I will read that. In fact, I'm going to read 8 through 14. For you were once darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Live as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth. And find out what pleases the Lord. Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. So focusing for a moment on verse 8, and your quarterly mentions the word live many times. In my ESV, it uses the word walk. So in verse 8, it says, live. You once were a child of darkness, now you're a child of the light. Live as children of light. My ESV says walk as children of light. But this is kind of a reference back to verses 1 and 2 of the chapter, which is why I wanted to cover that. So it's kind of a reiteration of that theme that we are to walk as children of light. We are to imitate God as a child would try to imitate a parent, using Christ as our model. To move forward, though, the verse 10 is the verse I probably want to focus on more than any other verse. It's the verse I do want to focus on more than any other verse. In your quarterly, it says, find out what pleases the Lord. And this comes after live as children of light. So it says, live as children of light and find out what pleases the Lord. My ESV says, try to discern what is pleasing to the Lord. And there I want to read you my footnote from verse 10 of chapter 5. It says, the Bible gives general principles for life, but followers of Christ must use wisdom to discern how to apply those principles to the concrete issues of their lives. Such wisdom may be defined as, quote, the skill of godly living, unquote, which one must thoughtfully discern, apply, and practice in order to live in a way that is pleasing to the Lord. Well, that phrase, the skill of godly living, or skill at godly living, really struck me. So I looked up the word skill in the dictionary, and here's what it said. It said the skill is the ability, a skill is the ability to do something well, an expertise. Well, an expertise, is that something we're just born with? I don't think so. Is that something we just snap our fingers and we've got an expertise at something? You know, probably not. I mean, this is not a state of mind we're talking about. A skill is something that takes an informed, long-term, and disciplined approach to achieve. And achieving godly living is a skill just like any other skill. If you're going to be a great basketball player, you gotta work at it. If you're going to be a great programmer, you've got to learn and you work at that. You have to be informed. You have to want to acquire more knowledge, and you've got to work hard at it, long at it, and in a very disciplined approach. Verse 11, I wanted to talk about that for a moment as well. Verse 11 in your quarterly says, "Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them." Well, that was exposed, kind of struck me. That's one of those harsh words in the Bible. So I wanted to look into that for a minute. I'm going to read you one other footnote from my ESV. So my ESV says, the footnote on verse 11 says, "Expose means to either reprove," which would be to correct, "to reprove or to convince through argument and discussion, at the same time taking great care not to gossip or slander or appear self-righteous before others. Christians should show by their lives and their wise interactions that the works of darkness are not to be ignored among God's holy people." So, what does that say about, strengthening one another, which is, the title of this lesson? Well, we need those around us who are skilled at godly living, don't we? We need those who are a little farther along on that journey, who can be examples to us and even reprove or correct us if that becomes necessary. And then conversely, we should be doing the same thing for our brothers and sisters who are maybe not as far along on the journey as we are. So that whole journey in acquiring the skill at godly living is what we can use to strengthen one another within the church. So I'm going to move forward now. The last few verses, let me read those one more time. It is, because I don't want to ignore them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret. But everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, "Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." Well, rather than try to dissect those verses, I'm going to kind of summarize, where we're at this point, because we'll address that there. So, you are a child of light. I am a child of light. We were once children of darkness, but now we are children of the light. As a child of light, you should focus on growing what? Growing your skills in godly living. Well, what does that mean? Well, it's two-faceted. We are to purposely avoid the works of darkness, and we are just as purposely to take advantage of the opportunities to produce the fruit of the light. It's like that thief that's supposed to now do honest work. There's two sides to the coin, not only the don'ts, but also the do's. As we grow our skills in godly living, Christ shines on us, making us brighter and brighter as we mature in our godly living. And, to what end? Well, the scripture also, for us personally, as we mature those skills in godly living, we should be able to better discern the will of God in our lives, but also so our light, that shine that Christ gives us, can then shine on others, can expose the darkness, and also set examples for our brothers and sisters in the church. That's what the church does. So why do you need the church? That's a good reason why. I'm going to go a little bit faster at this point because I felt like the remaining verses were kind of a reiteration of what we've already talked about. But let's briefly take a look at verses 15 through 17. And in your quarterly says, "Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish, but understand what the Lord's will is." So, why do we need to be careful? Why do we need to be wise? Well, we need to be careful and we need to be wise because we're works in progress, aren't we? We're on that journey, but it's one of those journeys with no destination, really, not in this life anyway. So we're never going to be there. We're always a work in progress. We're always a student in this process to acquire the skills and godly living. So there's dangers along the way. The days are evil, as the scripture says. So that pathway to godly living is not always clear, is it? Sometimes it's pretty confusing. That's why we try to discern the will of God, and we've got temptations to deviate from that path all around us. That's what Paul means by the days are evil. I mean, this is not necessarily an easy journey. And also, of course, our time on this earth, our time to be very purposeful and the good things that we want to do, that time is limited. But we are the children of light. We are Christ's light in a dark world, so it's up to us to set the example. Again, briefly, I'm going to take a look at verses 18 through 20. Won't focus really on 20. 21 is just really more of a transition, but 18 through 20. Do not get drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit. Sing and make music from your hearts to the Lord, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. It ends with verse 21, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. The verses that come after this, really, Paul starts to get into the specifics of family relationships and submitting, and I'm very thankful I don't have to teach on that. That's a fun area for everyone. So we're going to focus on verses 18 through 20. And he talks about the temptations of drink, but I'm not really going to focus on that either, because I think what it's really saying is, anything that's going to control the mind, anything that's going to impair judgment will set us back on that journey towards acquiring the skills of godly living. And will set us back on our mission to try to discern the will of God. So anything that's going to detract from that, whether it be drink or anything else, is a negative. That's certainly one of the don'ts. But what's one of the do's? We should try to, instead of filling our lives with those temptations, Paul is telling us to fill our lives with the Spirit, because that will lead towards self-control, along with the other fruits of the light, things like love, joy, peace, patience, and kindness. So to wrap up the lesson, very briefly, why do we need the church? Well, we need the church because the church is the source of light in a dark world, and we are the children of that light. We are the members of the church. We are God's chosen people. We are meant to be the example. And in our quest to grow our skills in godly living, that's a phrase I want you to remember. That's a phrase I want to remember. In our quest to grow our skills in godly living, we strengthen our brothers and sisters in the light, and we expose and hopefully decrease the darkness in the world. That concludes Lesson 5. Why do we need the church? I hope everybody has another great and safe week, and we'll see you back here next week. Bye.